Warning, this episode may contain disturbing content, soothing narration, and mild existential dread. Basically, murder ASMR for stressed professionals. Listener discretion is advised. Hell, it might be necessary.
We are all products of our environment, every one of us. Our experiences, good and bad, shape how we see the world, how we interact with it, whom we trust, whom we don't, and ultimately, who we become. For John Stuart, the man police would eventually identify as their prime suspect in the Whiskey A Go-Go firebombing, that environment was shaped by generational trauma, violence, institutional abuse, and crime. But plenty of people survive horrific childhoods without becoming accused mass murderers. So what happened? What transforms a troubled child into a career criminal? What turns a man into a police suspect in one of Australia's deadliest mass murders? And what happens when that same man insists that he actually tried to stop it? Because John Stuart claimed that he warned people. He claimed he warned the police. He claimed he warned the nightclub owners. And he claimed that nobody listened. Well, almost nobody. One reporter did. To understand why that mattered and why police considered Stuart a suspect and why some people believed that he knew far more about the Whiskey A Go-Go fire than he should have, we have to go back. Long before gasoline and matches were thrown into the foyer of a Brisbane nightclub, long before the fire, long before the deaths. Today we're examining the life of John Stuart, the abuse, the crimes, the institutions, and the strange relationship with the spotlight that would make him one of the most notorious figures in the Whiskey A Go-Go case. This is Foretold, Australia's Whiskey A Go-Go fire on Crime to Burn. Welcome to Crime to Burn, where we explore the dark city landscape where true crime intersects with arson and criminal negligence. Join us as we sift through the ashes to bring you the story of what really happened. Welcome back to Crime to Burn. I'm April, a fire protection engineer, former firefighter, and temporary disappointment to my parents. There is a story there, and I promise I will tell you about it at the end of the episode.
And I'm the guy that I tried to warn your parents and you, and frankly God and everyone else about.
You did.
And look what happened to you.
You were wrong. I love you. If you're new here, you're jumping in mid-race. This is part 2 of our Whiskey A Go-Go series, so if you'd like to go back and listen to part 1 first, you'll probably have an easier time following along. But don't let me tell you how to live your life. I will, however, ask you very kindly to leave us a 5-star rating in your podcast player of choice. Those ratings and written reviews, where they are allowed, are incredibly helpful for discoverability. We're a small podcast trying to swim alongside the much larger shows with big networks and advertising budgets. We, on the other hand, have home repair bills that still aren't resolved, but we have you lovely people to help us get seen. So when you take the time to leave a review, it genuinely helps. We are still sitting at 77 ratings on Apple Podcasts, where we've been stuck for a few weeks, and 74 on Spotify, which I think is also where we've been stuck for a few weeks. So if you haven't rated the show yet, go breathe some life into those numbers. And a special thanks to Heidi, Lisa Listens, and Heather Renee for your Spotify comments. We love hearing from you. And over on Podbean, M, I think that you were the one that asked us to cover more Australian cases, so this series actually exists because of your suggestion, so thank you. And also thank you to Lisa, Just Becky, and Glory for your comments and engagement. We appreciate all of you more than you know. I have still been almost completely absent from social media because things here have not become any less chaotic. I swear, I will make every effort to be back this week. So if you'd like to help us out, give us a follow on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, or X. And when you see our content, give it a like, leave a comment, save it, or share it. Every little interaction helps us overcome the algorithmic damage I've done by disappearing for a few weeks while attempting to lasso my mental health back from the brink and deal with 2 simultaneous home repair disasters. You can also help spread the word without saying a thing by just visiting our spread shop and picking up some Crime to Burn merch. Nothing says classy quite like an Arson Podcast t-shirt, and coffee absolutely tastes better out of a Crime to Burn mug, allegedly. And while you are never required to financially support this show because we will always be free on your favorite podcast player supported by ads, you can absolutely give us some of your hard-earned money if it will make you happy. The Patreon link is in the show notes. And finally, you can send us your episode feedback, case suggestions, fire stories, and the reasons your parents are disappointed in you at crimetoburn@gmail.com. Now, I joke about being a disappointment to my parents, but today's story features a man who spent most of his life disappointing just about everyone around him. By the time the Whiskey A Go-Go burned, John Stuart had already built quite a reputation. He was a career criminal, a frequent escapee, a police headache, a newspaper headline, and a man who seemed to be perpetually standing at the center of someone else's problems. But people aren't born that way, at least most of them aren't. Before John Stuart became the prime suspect in one of Australia's deadliest mass murders, he was a child. And to understand the man that police believed firebombed the Whiskey A Go-Go, we first have to understand the life that shaped him. Now, before we get into Stuart's life, I want to once again acknowledge the primary source I've used for this series. The book is The Whiskey A Go-Go Massacre, Murder, Arson, and the Crime of the Century by Jeff Plunkett. Almost all of the background information that I have on John Stuart comes from Mr. Plunkett's extensive research. Now, I reached out to him through his publisher, and he has kindly responded, and we are currently seeing if we can work out arrangements for an interview, which I'm very excited about. Now, I don't always spend a significant amount of time discussing the backgrounds of our alleged perpetrators. In fact, I often avoid going too deep into their histories because I don't want to shift the focus away from the victims. But in this case, I genuinely don't believe that it's possible to tell the story of the Whiskey A Go-Go fire without understanding John Stuart. Whether you believe Stuart was the mastermind behind the firebombing, a participant, or something else entirely, he sits at the center of the story. To understand why police focused on him so quickly and why he became such a controversial figure and why some people believed he knew far more than he should have, we have to understand the life that shaped him. And while John Stuart was, by all accounts, not a good man, I think it's important to acknowledge two things can be true at the same time. A person can be responsible for their own actions, and they can also be a product of profound abuse, institutional failures, and mental illness. Stuart was diagnosed by medical professionals with an, quote, extreme personality disorder, unquote. And his childhood and early adulthood were marked by violence, instability, and repeated contact with institutions that often seemed more interested in punishment than rehabilitation. None of that excuses anything that he may have done. If Stuart was the architect of the Whiskey A Go-Go firebombing, then he deserves no sympathy for that act. But understanding how he became the man that he was is not the same thing as excusing him. It's part of understanding the story. Because no one becomes who they are in a vacuum, and John Stuart was born into an exceptionally turbulent existence. So let's start at the beginning. On September 15th, 1940, John Andrew Joshua Stuart was born to David and Edna Stuart. John was apparently heavily teased for having 4 names, because, as we all know, children will find literally anything to make fun of. Now, he also had 2 brothers, Jim and Daniel, and a sister named June. Now, Edna, John's mother, was a deeply religious woman. Unfortunately, she had grown up in an abusive home and then married an abusive man. She was terrified of her husband, David, and she raised the children to fear him as well. Part of that fear came from the fact that David suffered from tuberculosis, so Edna constantly warned the children not to seek affection from him. Honestly, that was probably good advice for 2 reasons. Tuberculosis is highly contagious, and by all accounts, David Stuart was a monster to his family. Edna was reportedly beaten so severely that she was forced to defend herself on multiple occasions with a knife. She couldn't leave him, she said, because she had 4 children to support and nowhere to go. She later said that her faith is what got her through those years, but her children did not seem to find that same comfort. David allegedly abused them as well, and as his health deteriorated, he became invalid. He was also reportedly a raging alcoholic who made it clear that he had never wanted the children and viewed them as a burden, and once he could no longer work, he decided to turn to gambling, which meant that Edna had to work multiple jobs simply to keep food on the table. Unfortunately, that left the children alone with an abusive alcoholic father who subjected them to both physical and psychological abuse. And when he did spend time with the children, it wasn't exactly father-son bonding for John. According to accounts later gathered by Jeff Plunkett, David sometimes took John with him when he broke into cars and stole from them. John was allegedly participating in these break-ins with his father when he was as young as 4 and 5 years old.
Well, at least he's teaching him a trade.
Now, I don't want to oversimplify human behavior. Plenty of people endure horrific childhoods and never become criminals. Plenty of people experience abuse and go on to live productive, law-abiding lives. But it is difficult to ignore the environment in which John Stuart was raised. Violence was normal, crime was normal, fear was normal. And eventually, John and his brother Daniel became known for violence themselves. Both men would later develop reputations for abusing women and engaging in violent behavior. John, in particular, would become known as a brawler who seemed unable or unwilling to stay out of trouble. By age 13, he dropped out of school, and the same year he was arrested for the first time for stealing, and the court ordered him to pay restitution and released him. A year later, he was facing essentially the same charges again, and then another arrest, and another. And by 1955, at just 15 years old, Stuart was already collecting car theft charges. And on February 5th, 1956, just a few months shy of his 16th birthday, he graduated from petty crime to something more serious, a stabbing. According to Stuart, he got into an argument with a man named Kenneth Steen at a local hamburger shop. Stuart later claimed that when they went outside, Steen started, quote, throwing his weight around. So Stuart attempted to strike him in the hand with a knife, and unfortunately, according to Stuart's version of events, he missed, and accidentally stabbed the man in the stomach instead. Which is one of those explanations that sounds considerably less convincing when you say it out loud. When police searched Stuart's residence, they found the weapon, which was a 3-bladed pocket knife, and Stuart helpfully informed investigators that the man wasn't properly dressed unless he was carrying his hat and knife, as one does.
Whoa.
I don't disagree with him there.
I don't see any problem with that logic at all.
I just thought it was funny in the book they pointed it out, like, why would you say that to police? And my only response is, why would you say anything to police unless you have a lawyer there?
Talk to a police at all. Yeah,
Plenty of men don't leave the house without their knife.
How could you live? I just don't understand.
I depend on you to carry a knife around. I would never be able to cut anything sharp without you.
Cut anything sharp? Why are we cutting sharp things?
See, I can't even express myself. I need you. I need your sharpness.
I'm here for you.
Thank
with
you.
all my razor edge.
Fortunately for Stuart, Kenneth Steen survived his injuries. Had he died, Stuart likely would have faced a murder charge. Instead, he was convicted of what Queensland law referred to as, quote, an attempt to unlawfully kill, unquote.
Ooh. Is there an attempt to lawfully kill?
That's what I was wondering.
That seems specific, though, you know?
It does. Now, the record gets a little bit confusing at this point. The book indicates that Stuart was initially sent to prison, but because he was still under 17 years old, he was later released under Section 24 of Queensland's State Children's Act of 1911. That law generally prohibited courts from sentencing children under 17 to standard imprisonment, and instead required that they be placed under state supervision, sent to reform institutions, or released on probation. Whatever legal path got him there, the end result was the same. Stuart was eventually released into his mother's custody, and his mother was required to guarantee his good behavior until he reached 18 years of age. If he found himself in trouble again, he would be sent to the farm home for boys at Westbrook. As you might imagine, this did not prove to be much of a deterrent. Within weeks, Stuart was once again attracting police attention. Now, it's worth noting that the State Children's Act remained in effect until 1965 when it was finally repealed, and it reflected a very different philosophy of juvenile justice than we would recognize today. Under certain circumstances, boys could still be subjected to corporal punishment, including flogging, while girls were generally spared that particular indignity.
Ooh, flog me, I'd just be committing crimes.
As we'll see, however, avoiding a flogging did not mean avoiding abuse. And before long, John Stuart would find himself headed to Westbrook anyway. Now, after his release, Stuart began using aliases. There were quite a few of them over the years, but my personal favorite was his habit of using the surname Trauts, Trauts, which is simply Stuart spelled backwards.
Oh, that's really clever.
He would pair it with a rotating cast of generic first names, which somehow makes it even funnier to me. He did have other aliases, but Trauts was the one that he seemed to use the most. Unfortunately for Stuart, a backwards last name was not enough to keep him out of trouble. There were more arrests, there were missed court appearances, there was the general sort of chaos that seemed to follow him everywhere he went. But what ultimately landed him at the farm home for boys was an incident that perfectly illustrates the difference between how Stuart's mother viewed him and how police viewed him. According to Edna, Stuart's mother, a friend's wife had gone into labor and desperately needed transportation. Depending on which version of the story you're reading, Stuart either needed to get her to the hospital or to her home. Either way, according to Edna, her son stepped up to help. The problem was his chosen method of assistance. Rather than call for help, or find someone with a car, or call an ambulance, Stuart allegedly solved the problem by borrowing a complete stranger's vehicle without permission.
They call that Grand Theft Auto.
They do. Because apparently Grand Theft Auto is what happens when some people decide to perform community service.
Well, I understand tactically relocating assets and all that, but this is private.
After completing this supposed act of heroism, Stuart returned the vehicle, where he was greeted by both police officers and a very unimpressed owner.
Well, he did return it.
Neither group appears to have been particularly moved by the Good Samaritan defense, and Stuart was arrested. And this time the court followed through on the warning that had been hanging over his head since his release. He was sent to the notorious Westbrook Farm Home for boys near Toowoomba, where he would remain until he turned 18 years old. Westbrook was supposed to be a reform school. Instead, it was something much darker. Years after Stuart's release, investigations into the conditions at the facility revealed a shocking pattern of abuse. Boys were issued a single set of clothes for an entire week in which they were doing farm work from dusk until dawn. Food was often spoiled, rotten, or even infested with maggots, and former residents described being in near constant starvation. The boys worked from dawn until dusk on the farm, and some became so desperate for food that they would eat the vegetables from the fields that they were cultivating, and if they were caught, they would be severely punished and beaten. Former residents also reported routine physical violence at the hands of staff. Investigators later uncovered very extensive allegations of sexual abuse, as well as a culture in which authority was routinely abused and violence was used as a tool for control. Children were not given adequate bedding or warm clothing for cold winters, and many former residents recall being constantly hungry, cold, frightened, and exhausted. Conditions there became so intolerable that in the 1960s, dozens of boys coordinated a mass escape attempt. Now, these weren't hardened adult criminals plotting a prison break. These were children, hungry children, abused children, children who decided that whatever waited for them outside Westbrook was preferable to another day inside. Now, it's important to acknowledge that many of the boys sent to Westbrook had committed crimes. Some of them had been violent, and some had repeatedly run afoul of the law. But nothing in anyone's record justifies what allegedly happened at Westbrook. The institution was eventually reformed following later investigations, though it did remain open until the 1990s. And when John Stuart arrived at Westbrook, he went from an abusive home filled with terror to a state-sanctioned abuse factory to continue the cycles that had already led to a life of crime. When John was at Westbrook, his father died, and he was reportedly granted temporary leave to attend the funeral, and sometime afterward, his mother remarried and became Edna Watts. When Stuart finally was released in 1958 at 18 years old, Australia was in the middle of a youth rebellion. These rebellious young people were known as bodgies and widgies. Bodgies were the boys, and widgies were the girls, and if you were looking for an American comparison, think greasers. If you're looking for a British comparison, think rockers. So, bodgies were typically working-class young men with greased-back hair and flashy clothes that were inspired by American movie stars like James Dean. The widgies allegedly scandalized respectable society by cutting their hair short and wearing tight pants and dancing and drinking and listening to loud music and generally refusing to behave the way that 1950s society thought that young women should behave. Naturally, this caused a moral panic. Newspapers and authority figures often portrayed bodgies and widgies as juvenile delinquents and sex-crazed troublemakers who were helping drag society toward ruin, which, as we've seen before, is something every generation seems convinced the younger generation is doing. When Stuart got out of Westbrook, he embraced the bodgie lifestyle wholeheartedly. He had a string of widgies he was associated with over the years, and I feel ridiculous saying those terms.
I'm coping with it.
And during the next 2 years, from 1958 through 1960, Stuart continued collecting criminal charges at an impressive rate. There were stolen cars, dangerous driving offenses, assaults, obscene language charges.
That's a charge?
Yes, makes me grasp my pearls. And a variety of other run-ins with police. And at the same time, he was developing a reputation not just as a criminal, but as a leader. Police would say he became a gang leader among the bodgies. His mother would describe him during this time a little bit differently. She described him as a charismatic young man who always seemed to have a crowd of younger kids following him around. She compared him to Peter Pan.
Oh, Peter Pan. Yeah, that's how whimsical.
It's probably not the comparison that most people would make after reviewing Stuart's criminal record, but it does tell us something important, that people followed him. And that ability to attract followers and command attention and place himself at the center of a story would become one of the defining features of John Stewart's life. By 1960, Stuart had spent years building a very impressive criminal resume, and at 20 years old, he relocated to New South Wales, but it did not improve his decision-making. Police wanted to question Stuart there in connection with a series of crimes, so they brought him in for questioning. Stuart responded by assaulting the officer and escaping, where police recaptured him, and he assaulted them again and escaped again. Unfortunately for Stuart, he apparently had somewhere he desperately needed to be, which made finding him considerably easier. The hospital, because his girlfriend was there. And according to police, she was there because Stuart had broken her jaw. Authorities eventually found Stuart attempting to visit her at the hospital and arrested him once again. Now, despite the allegations, Stuart was never charged in connection with the assault on his girlfriend, and the reason appears to be depressingly familiar. She refused to provide a written statement. Letters exchanged between the two suggest a pattern that will be familiar to anyone who has studied abusive relationships. Stuart alternated between violence and affection. Even after his incarceration, the pair continued corresponding, and she reportedly maintained that she loved him. Eventually, however, she did manage to distance herself from him. And unfortunately, this would not be the last time Stuart found himself accused of abusing women. Over the years, both Stuart and his brother Daniel accumulated reputations for violence toward their partners. In Stuart's case, the allegations extended beyond physical abuse and included accusations of sexual assault, rape, and relationships with underage girls. It was during this period of incarceration that mental health professionals diagnosed Stuart with what records describe as a very extreme personality disorder, and I want to be careful here. Mental illness does not make someone violent, and it doesn't make someone a criminal. But it's impossible to look at Stuart's life up to this point and ignore the combination of severe childhood abuse, institutional abuse, repeated criminal behavior, and significant mental health concerns that appear throughout this record.
Well, people are, in their minds, a series of programs. It makes a lot of sense.
So following that diagnosis, Stuart was transferred from prison to Callan Park Mental Hospital in Sydney, which naturally he immediately escaped from. Now, he fled back to Queensland and managed to remain on the run for 4 entire days before being recaptured. Authorities then transferred him to the maximum security Ipswich Mental Hospital. By July of 1961, just shy of his 21st birthday, Stuart was paroled and moved back in with his mother. And almost immediately, he returned to the same patterns that had defined much of his life thus far. There was more stealing, more fighting, more arrests, and more short periods of incarceration. And perhaps most importantly, he was gaining a growing notoriety. Because John Stuart was about to become something far more dangerous than a petty criminal. He was about to become famous. Or infamous. In January of 1962, John Stewart's growing notoriety finally attracted the attention of Brisbane's tabloids. A newspaper called the Sunday Truth ran a story about him beneath the headline, "City Search for Maniac." The article described Stuart as a vicious, police-hating, drug-addicted mental patient who operated within Brisbane's so-called murky underworld. Now, if you're John Stuart, this is probably not the sort of publicity you want, or perhaps it is. Because this story introduced Stuart to a man who would become one of the most important figures in his life. A reporter named Brian the Eagle Bolton.
I hope he has a cool tattoo.
He does. I'm going to tell you about the tattoo, actually.
Oh, really?
Bolton worked for the Sunday Truth and had a reputation nearly as colorful as many of the people that he wrote about. Colleagues later described him as a perpetually intoxicated man and accused him of acting as a mouthpiece for some of Brisbane's less scrupulous police officers. He cultivated a vast network of police contacts and was rumored to have connections that extended deep into Brisbane's criminal underworld as well. In other words, Bolton lived in the space between law enforcement and organized crime, and maybe where they overlapped, and he seemed perfectly comfortable there. The nickname the Eagle came from a tattoo he had. According to later accounts, the tattoo had been given to him by one of John Stewart's associates, a bodgie named Billy Phillips. Phillips's wife had been badly injured by a parcel bomb, and during her recovery, Bolton had reportedly shown up with groceries for the family. Whether this was an act of genuine kindness, good management of your sources, or some combination of the two is difficult to say. Whatever the motivation, Phillips repaid the favor by tattooing an eagle on Bolton. And before long, Bolton and Stuart were going to become very acquainted. It's possible that being called crazy in the news triggered Stuart just a little because according to the timeline in the book, this is where he reaches out to the medical supervisor at the mental institution where he had been evaluated and held and eventually escaped, and tells her, "Ha ha ha, I fooled you, I'm not really crazy. I just did all that to make you think I was crazy, so you transfer me to a mental hospital where I could escape. I'm sorry about that, but hey, can you send me the suitcase I left there? There's a ring and $5 in there that I really want."
What? Well, you're making a really great layered argument for being pretty crazy.
In that June of 1962, Stuart was again rearrested, and Bolton reported on it, recounting Stuart's previous antics. He included in his report that Stuart had claimed that he just faked his mental disorder in order to be transferred to the mental hospital so he could escape to see his girlfriend, which honestly appeared to be true since he was picked up trying to see her at the hospital. But Edna, dear Edna, his mother, she says that everyone got it all wrong. Stuart actually escaped because he had been wrongfully accused of arson, and he had faked his insanity to get transferred to a place that he could escape from because he needed to get out, to get his story out, to prove that he was sane. And obviously the best way to do that and get out from under a wrongful arson charge is escape a mental hospital.
That's some heavy-duty enabling right there. Was she funding this?
Oh yeah, she was raising money for his defense every time he got arrested.
All right.
And if you're starting to see a trend of mama justifying everything this kid does, you're not the only one. But Stuart was sent back to Ipswich, which was a maximum security mental hospital. And now that he was stuck and needed to switch the narrative so he wasn't labeled as insane, he personally reached out to Bolton. By this point, Stuart had such a reputation in court that he was actually escorted by more than 7 police officers when he had to be taken into the courtroom for safety. But during this time, Stuart kept communicating with Bolton, and he would feed him little tidbits of information that Bolton could use in his stories. And Stuart seemed to begin to really like the attention. Now, around the same time, Stuart was sending coded letters to his brother. According to police, they eventually cracked the code and uncovered what appeared to be a very elaborate escape plan. Authorities allege that Stuart intended to escape from Bago Road Jail while being transferred from the mental institution back to the prison. The plan supposedly involved accomplices detonating an explosive near the perimeter wall, and while officers were distracted by the blast, Stuart would escape over the wall, recover a cache of money that had allegedly been hidden at a nearby golf course. Now, whether that plan was realistic, half-baked, or pure fantasy is difficult to say. What we do know is that the alleged plot never happened, and shortly afterwards, Stuart did something interesting. He wrote to Brian Bolton, but this time, he was not sending Bolton a complaint or a tip. He wasn't attacking police, and he wasn't asking for sympathy. This time, he was providing a warning. According to Stuart, inmates at the Sandy Gallop Mental Hospital, which Stuart referred to as the Nut House, those are his words, not mine.
Yeah, so I think they do mental institutions different in Australia. They're inmates at a maximum security mental institution.
I think these are like the prisons for
doesn't sound like
criminally insane.
Doesn't sound like a hospital,
no.
does it?
I think there's a difference between like mental institution and criminally insane jail. And that's
some shit out of Gotham City or
exactly.
something. Arkham City Center for the Criminally Insane.
And this is in the 60s, so I'm
That's
sure
about
it's changed
right.
a lot.
That's about right for Arkham.
According to Stuart, inmates at Sandy Gallop Mental Hospital, which Stuart referred to as the Nut House, which are his words and not mine, were planning a mass escape. The alleged scheme was surprisingly sophisticated. Stuart claimed that inmates had attained hacksaw blades and were cutting through the bars, and that they had managed to create a master key out of tin using a scale drawing of the warden's key. So Bolton published the story, and something remarkable happened. Authorities searched the institution, and according to reports, they found evidence that supported Stuart's claims. Investigators allegedly discovered hacksaw blades, and they discovered a replica master key fashioned from tin. In other words, at least some portion of Stuart's story appeared to be true, and that's where things started to get complicated. Because if Stuart was telling the truth, then he had potentially helped to stop a mass escape. But if Stuart was involved in the plot, then his warning may have served a very different purpose. Was he distancing himself from a scheme that he actually helped to create? Was he sabotaging other inmates? Was he manipulating the situation to make himself look important? Or was he genuinely trying to prevent the escape? Now, your guess is as good as mine, but personally, I find it very difficult to imagine that a man who had spent years escaping from prisons, mental hospitals, and just about anywhere else that attempted to contain him suddenly developed a philosophical objection to jailbreaks. But stranger things have happened. What matters isn't whether Stuart was the hero or the villain in the story. What matters is that he was right, or at least right enough, and people noticed. Bolton noticed, the police noticed, the public noticed. For perhaps the first time in his life, Stuart had discovered something incredibly valuable. Information. Not stolen cars, not stolen property, not violence, but information. And information, he learned, could be powerful. Whether he was seeking attention or experimenting with manipulation or genuinely trying to help, the result was the same. John Stuart had now become a source. A man who seemed to know things before they happened. A man who could pick up a pen and write a letter to a reporter and influence what happened next. And according to police, that would become one of the defining patterns of his life. Because years later, when investigators began looking for the mastermind behind the Whiskey A Go-Go fire, they would see the same pattern all over again. A major crime, a warning, insider knowledge, and John Stuart standing uncomfortably close to all of it. But there was one more defining force that shaped the way that police viewed John Stuart: paranoia. And unlike many aspects of Stuart's personality, that paranoia can be tracked back to one specific event. One shooting, one accusation, one moment that Stuart would spend the rest of his life insisting changed everything. Whether he was telling the truth is another matter entirely. But from that point forward, Stuart became obsessed with proving where he had been, documenting his movements, and convincing people that he was being set up. And years later, when the Whiskey A Go-Go burned, those same behaviors would once again place him at the center of the story. So next week, we'll examine the shooting that changed John Stuart's life, his growing relationship with police and the press, and the warnings he claimed to have given before one of Australia's deadliest fires. That's next time on Crime to Burn.
I think I picked up on something. He's making like a Russian nesting doll of bull.
So I have a story about being disappointing to my parents.
Oh, it's not a story, it's true.
You know how sometimes in life, when things get stressful and chaotic and you feel like you just have absolutely no control over anything? So some people meditate and some people go for a walk and some people journal, and some of us develop an overwhelming urge to make questionable decisions. And I learned when I was 17 that when this feeling strikes, you should never get bangs, under any circumstances. I regretted many things in my life, but few as immediately as bangs. Now, an ill-advised home renovation project wasn't really an option because we're already living through several of those. So my brain went looking for something else and settled on a tattoo. For the record, I have 0 tattoos. My father has never been a fan of tattoos, which I always assumed was because he didn't want my teenage self doing something impulsive. In hindsight, he should have spent less time warning me about tattoos as a teenager and more time warning me about bangs, but here we are. Now, my husband has tattoos, and my parents love him. So clearly, tattoos aren't a deal breaker. And what I needed was maybe a test run before I did something permanent. So I got targeted by one of those semi-permanent tattoo ads online. You know the ones. They last a couple weeks and they supposedly look real, and I'm not going to tell you which company I used because they aren't paying me. But I found a raven tattoo, and apparently my thought process went, well, if we're pretending to get a tattoo, let's commit. And I managed to talk myself down from an entire sleeve of questionable life choices and settled on a 7-inch raven, which I plastered on my inner forearm, which my husband objected to, just the location. He also rolled his eyes so hard that I kind of thought he might sprain something. But I applied the tattoo and I waited 2 days for it to fully develop. And then I video called my parents who were enjoying a peaceful beach vacation, or at least they were. And I held up my arm. And my mother's face immediately suggested that I had either joined a cult or committed a felony. She stared at it for a moment and then finally said, "That had better be fake." Now, in my defense, I fully intended to tell her it was fake eventually, but her reaction was so funny that I could not stop laughing, which probably made me look even guiltier. And those semi-permanent tattoos can look surprisingly convincing. They're not shiny like the little temporary tattoos we had as kids. And I don't know, I think it legitimately looked like I had maybe gone out and gotten a giant raven tattooed on my arm.
Nope. Your new tattoo would be shiny.
Well.
If you had a new tattoo, it'd be shiny because you'd be applying A&D and all kinds. It would be shiny for a while.
All right. But my mother was horrified. Absolutely horrified. I asked her what she'd do if I got a real tattoo, and she just said, no. Now keep in mind that I am 47 years old. So I asked what would happen if I got one somewhere she couldn't see, and she thought about it for a second and said, well, then I wouldn't know about it, would I? Which honestly is starting to feel a lot like permission. Maybe permission adjacent. What really surprised me, though, is that years ago, I started vaping. I was never a smoker. But when I told my mother I was vaping, she wasn't super thrilled about the decision, but she wasn't upset. And yet somehow she was significantly more upset by the possibility of a tattoo than an actual nicotine habit. I'm not entirely sure what to do with that information. So there you have it. I have disappointed my mother. My father actually handled the situation pretty well, and for the record, I really like the raven. I'm just not convinced I want him living on my forearm permanently. I don't want this to become another bangs situation. So for now, I'm treating this as a trial period, and the raven has about another week and a half before he disappears. And honestly, I kind of like having him around. I'm calling him Edgar. It's cliche, yes, but at least I didn't get bangs. Yet.
You want me to cut you some bangs?
Nope. I learned. 17. Promised never to get bangs again.
I feel like you should have let me hit you with the stun gun while you were doing that.
Maybe later.
We could play tag and release. I could skin you like a deer.
So that's the story of how I disappointed my parents most recently. I'm sure there's other things I've done.
I thought that was one of the funniest things I'd ever seen.
You were laughing so hard you were crying. Especially because I was like, well, my husband has tattoos. You like him? And she goes, he had tattoos when I met him, though. And you pointed out that no, you didn't. Because she met you when you were only 8 years old. And
that was a couple of years before I got my first tattoo.
A couple years. Didn't you give yourself your first tattoo?
Yeah.
See, I never gave myself a tattoo as a kid.
No, if you really want to own it.
I did paint my fingernails with white out every chance I got.
Well, it's fun to peel off.
Yeah.
Or put glue on your fingers.
I didn't like the feeling of glue on my fingers, so I didn't do that one a lot. But if somebody else did it, I would gladly peel it off of them for them.
Oh, dear. You're like a monkey. Just peeling through someone's hair, looking for a nit.
Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
That's a lot of testes.
I had a pen pal from Australia when I was a little kid. Her name was Jackie.
Pen pals from other countries are cool because they can't turn into stalkers really easy.
Her name was Jackie, and her last name began with a K, and she was from New South Wales, but I can't remember what her last name was.
It's probably for the best, or you would just tell everybody.
Maybe she listens.
Send her a free sticker.
If you're Jackie from New South Wales and you had a pen pal named April from the United States when you were little, send me an email.
When she wrote letters, did she cut out each individual letter and glue it onto the page?
No.
Probably safe.
We're going to talk about bangs.
I can't wait. Man, I'm glad I showed up today. No, the bun is just, every bun they have is a bottom sog bun.
It's got a soggy bottom.
All their bottom buns are soggy. But I don't complain.
I put the last bun in the toaster through 3 broil cycles and it never got crispy.
Put that bun in the air fryer. Mm-hmm. Healthy living around here.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I don't like tomatoes either.
Oh, girl.
I like tomato flavored things.
Name one.
Ketchup. It's a texture thing. I don't like tomatoes.
Fresh tomato?
I don't know, they like burst in your mouth. The only thing that's allowed to burst in my mouth is a piece of orange. And
well, why are you putting a whole tomato in your mouth, first of all?
It doesn't
and how
matter.
do you put a whole tomato in your mouth?
It's got all those little juice.
Those are called seeds. Tomato seeds. Did you say juicules? What about a schnozberry?
No, but I hear they taste like real schnozberries.
Only if you get real schnozberries.
Or you lick the wallpaper in Willy Wonka's hallway.
Who hasn't done that on a Thursday? Leave it to me. I'll fuck it up. That's why I write things down.
I feel like I have to burp now.
Yeah, do it.
I might not have to. Sometimes it just freaks me out that I'm about to start talking and my body's like, quick, panic about something. You have to burp. There's phlegm in your throat. What's happening to the Dow Jones Industrial?
That's not something I ever really pondered. I want to be sold on the black market. Sounds hot.
What turns a man into a police suspect?
Police?
Police. Like, I'm trying to yodel.
No, you're just making the siren sound while you say it.
That's right. We, on the other hand, have home repair bills that still aren't resolved, and you lovely people. So when you take
Damn. Bro.
Well, I was telling them the home repair
you
bills.
Fuckers, you won't give us any money. No.
Okay, I see how that came across, but I meant like we have this awful thing and then we have these delightful things.
And you could say it more like an up note or something. Okay. Then we have you. Great. Now you're here too.
We, on the other hand, have home repair bills that still aren't resolved. And you lovely people.
God, you said that sounds diabolical, dude.
I gotta find a different way to say it. That sounds
You could
terrible.
just be genuine about your fans. You're a nightmare.
And finally, you can send us your episode feedback, case suggestions, fire stories, and the reasons your parents are disappointed in you at crimetoburn@gmail.com.
That's not disappointing. That exceeded my expectations.
Because no one becomes who they are in a vacuum. It's because you can't breathe in a vacuum.
It's hard to develop.
And John Stewart was born...
And it's noisy.
Yeah.
And you got all the like weird couch peanuts coming at you. Like,
oh, couch peanuts and purse peanuts. You have a history with those. Mostly the purse peanuts. We talked about it in a
there's no need to bring it back up, really. I'm trying to forget.
Because no one becomes who they are in a vacuum, and John Stewart was born into an exceptionally turbulent existence. Kind of like a vacuum.
Kind of like...
Sorry.
You know what? I'm starting to think maybe Australia is just an alternate timeline. It's not even a real place. I'm tearing the house down with my comfort.
Unless I get a tattoo, in which case my mother will show up to beat me.
You'll be excommunicated from the family. I think they need you. I don't think they can really get rid of you. Like, there's no one to take your place. In my family, it's a bunch of motherfuckers. Like, you could easily be replaced, but in your situation, you kind of got them by the nutsack. You could probably get a face tattoo and just have to groove on it. I just wanted to tell you what to do. I don't really care. I do like telling you what to do, though. It's fun. All I want for Father's Day is...
This is what Amazon Vine thinks that... This is what the algorithm thinks I need.
Is that a Narcan dispenser?
It is an emergency, high-visibility Narcan cabinet. Yeah.
Because we could put snacks in there.
It says it holds just up to 8 standard supply boxes. It doesn't say that it comes with the Narcan.
But we could put snacks in there.
My algorithm is about to get so weird.
I can make holes in the wall. Your parents are probably right, but you don't have to do what they say.
I'm afraid to disappoint them.
It's too late.
I think she would have been less upset with me if I told her I'd committed a crime.
Oh, like what kind of crime are we talking about?
You couldn't see her face when I showed her, but she just literally was like, "Oh, what's up? That better be fake."
Or else.
I know.
Consequences.
Like, what are you gonna do? Drive here?
I'll cook
Give me a spanking?
This is getting weird.
And that's all I have to say about that, Jen A.
Come on, I'm gonna teach you how to dangle.
Crime to Burn is a production of Crime to Burn LLC, where we light fires in your brain and not your buildings. All rights reserved. Still spiritually parched after this episode? It's okay, Steve believes in cross-pollination. Here's a trailer for a show we think deserves to infiltrate your ear holes, in a good way. Don't forget to leave a 5-star review before you go. Steve is watching.
They say the past was a simpler time. Kids rode their bikes till the streetlights came on. Neighbors looked out for one another, and everybody kept their doors unlocked. But for many families, this was not the reality. I'm Megan, host of A Simpler Time True Crime, where each week I revisit older unsolved cases from decades past. Disappearances, suspicious deaths, and stories that were never fully told. Through a victim and survivor-centered lens, I challenge the idea that a simpler time meant a safer one, and give voice to those left behind. Because time doesn't erase the need for answers, and every case deserves a second look. Tune in each week and subscribe to A Simpler Time True Crime wherever you get your podcasts.